Okay, so we have our second all factoring problem. So we're going to factor this polynomial using all the techniques that we've talked about so far. It's going to be awesome, you guys. So again, when we do this, we are going to be constantly referencing that chart that I showed you in the previous problem, which shows you how many terms you have and how or what factoring technique you should use. So if you see here, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 terms. So looking at that nifty chart, if you have 4 or more terms, the only way to factor is by group factoring. Okay, so we have to do group factoring. So I have 6 terms. So remember, I like to group things in groups of 2 if I can. So I'm going to group things in 2 groups of 2. Two groups with 3 terms in each parenthesis. Okay, so I have 1 parenthesis here and 1 parenthesis here. And I am looking for things that are in common between the terms. So let's take a look. We're trying to find some things that 3 terms have that are in common. So we're looking for variables that are in common and as well as exponents that are in common. Okay, so any of those could help us out. Okay, so this one's kind of tricky because we have a lot of terms that contain x, but not all of them do. Okay, and we have definitely more than 3 terms that contain x. So I'm probably not even going to look at the x on this one, you guys. So I want to look for 3 terms that have something else in common other than the x. Holy hot dog, you guys are so smart. Okay, I agree. I think our 3 terms are going to be the ones with the a's in it. And then the other 3 terms are going to be the ones with the b's in them. Okay, so these 3 have b's in them, and the purple terms have a's in them. So that's how I'm going to group mine together. So I have an a to the third x squared minus 16a to the third x plus 64a to the third. All right, in my second parentheses, I have negative b cubed x squared plus 16b to the third x minus 64b to the third. Okay, so next step, we must factor out the GCF. So, first of all, let's look at the numbers, which this one doesn't have a number, so there secretly is a 1 in front of it. Okay, which 1, 16, and 64, the only thing that goes into all 3 of those numbers is 1. Okay, which we don't use 1 in the GCF. All 3 of my terms don't have an x in it, so that's not going to help me, but all terms do have an a cubed in them. So, since all of them have an a cubed, my GCF is going to be a to the third. All right, let's see what happens after we divide all of these by a to the third. So, since all of my terms contain an a to the third, all my a to the third terms are going to cancel out, you guys. So, what's left is x squared minus 16x and then plus 64. All right, guys, now remember, the goal is to get the same thing in my next parentheses. So before we do that, I'm going to kind of look at it to see what kind of numbers we're dealing with, and also I'm going to look to see if we have any signs that need to be changed, which means we need to pull out a negative. So let's see what happens. All right, my x squared term here has a negative in front of it, but here it's positive. My 16 term has a negative here, but a positive here. And my 64 is positive here, but negative here. So it's looking like I am going to have to factor out a negative because my signs are off. All right, and now let's see what the GCF is. So what is in common between all 3 terms? Holy hot dog, it is b to the third, you guys. B to the third is in every single term. Okay, and x's are not in every term, so that's not a GCF. And there's not a number that goes into 1, 16, and 64 other than 1. So that's just going to be negative b to the third. So I'm going to divide all of these by negative b to the third. Okay, let's get this show on the road. So a negative divided by a negative will be positive, and my b to the thirds will cancel out. So this will be a positive x squared. All right, my next one, my b to the thirds will cancel out. And a positive 16 divided by a negative will be a negative 16. And then I also have the x to add on. So x. And then a negative 64 divided by a negative will be a positive 64. And my b to the thirds will cancel out. And holy hot dog, do you guys see we have the same thing in each parenthesis? Remember, when we group factor, the goal is to get the same thing in each parenthesis. All right, and then remember, you guys, our final answer is going to be the GCFs are going to go in one parenthesis. So my a to the third minus b to the third. All right, and then the repeated term goes in the other parenthesis. So x squared minus 16x plus 64. All right, but you must always ask yourself, can I keep factoring? So with each of these parentheses, we need to ask ourselves that question. Okay, so my first parenthesis has two terms and we're subtracting. So let's see here. Two terms. Okay, the only ones that have two terms and are subtracting are my difference of squares and difference of cubes, which, in order to use a difference of cubes or a difference of squares, I have to be able to either square root or cube root. So let's see if a difference of squares will work. Can I square root an a to the third and a b to the third? No. Okay, so the index on a square root is 2, and we divide the exponents by the index. Okay, so 3 cannot be divided by 2, but I can cube root a to the third and b to the third. Okay, because the cube root index is 3, and 3 can be divided by 3. So this one is telling me I'm going to be using a difference of cubes on this term. So this will be a difference of cubes. All right, now this one has 3 terms. So for 3 terms, my options are slide and divide or the quadratic formula, which be careful, you guys, if you use the quadratic formula, these give you the x values. So like if you do the quadratic formula and get like x equals 2, x equals 1, okay, these are zeros. We need to get these into factored form. So the way we get these in factored form, if you do the quadratic formula, you need to move them to the other side because this should equal 0. So like the factors would be x minus 2 and x minus 1. Or basically, you guys, if you have the zeros, you just change the signs on these numbers and bam, that is factored form. So since we are factoring, if you use the quadratic formula, you must move the numbers over, which will change their signs. So just be careful if you use the quadratic formula. All right, which on this one, I personally like slide and divide. So I'm going to do slide and divide on this one. Slide and divide. All right, guys, let's get going. So I'm going to do the difference of cubes first. Okay, so the difference of cubes, I'm going to cube root the first term, which is a to the third, and my second term, but I ignore the negative, so it'll be b to the third. All right, we're going to be dividing those exponents. So 3 divided by 3 is 1. So this will be a to the first. And 3 divided by 3 is 1. So this will be b to the first. All right, guys, and then I just use that nifty formula, which if you look here, okay, it says we do a minus the c. So I'm going to subtract my a and my c. Okay, so this is my a term, and this is my c term. All right, so I'm going to do a minus b. So I'm going to write my final answer down here to kind of separate it out. So my final answer I'm going to do in green. Okay, so it'll be a minus b. All right, and then it says, if we look here, we do the a minus the c, and then we do a squared plus ac plus c squared. So let's do that next. So a squared is a squared plus a times c. So a times b is ab plus c squared. So my c term is b, so b squared is b squared. All right, so this part is my difference of cubes. Okay, now I'm going to do slide and divide before I can get my final answer. So let's start sliding and dividing. All right, when we slide and divide, I'm going to identify the a, b, and c real quickly. So the a is the number in front of the x squared, which is a 1. The b is the number in front of the x, which is negative 16. And the c is a 64, the number without the x. All right, so remember we slide the a, to c, and we're going to multiply. So we're going to multiply these together. So we slide the 1, which means eventually we're going to divide by 1. So I'm going to set up my final answer here. We're eventually going to divide by 1 in my final answer. And remember, you guys, our final answer always has x's in it. Okay, so we slide 1 over to 64 and we multiply them. So 1 times 64 is 64. So I need two numbers that multiply to be AC, which is 64, and add to be B, which is 16. Okay, so we slid it over and then we divided it over here. Slide and divide. All right, so I need two numbers that multiply to be 64 and add to be positive 16. Holy hot dog, you guys are so smart. It's 8 and 8. Okay, so these are the numbers that are going to go in my parentheses. So they're both positive 8, so it's going to be plus 8 and plus 8. Okay, and then we simplify, you guys, which I'm going to write my simplified form down here with my answer. So I'm going to write this answer with the other answer, and the whole thing's going to be my final answer. So x plus 8 over 1, 8 over 1, 8 divided by 1 simplifies to be 8. So it'll be x plus 8, and also x plus 8 over 1 is also x plus 8. All right, guys, so all of this would be my final answer. All right, and also you could simplify this down. Since I have two x plus 8s, technically I could have written this term as x plus 8 squared because there are two of them. So if you would rather write this and then the x plus 8 squared, okay, that would make your answer even more simplified, okay? But I'll accept either answer. So yes, that was awesome, you guys.